Alright guys, so we are going to be starting off with a pretty straightforward thing for Azure BICEP is to create a storage account. So we're going to title this Lab 01. Let's go ahead and create some modules. So typically what we're going to do is have a module, and that's going to be called by main.bicep if you're doing separate components. For example, if we're doing a storage account and then a private endpoint, we will typically need a virtual network. But for simplicity, we're just going to do a storage account. So before we start everything up, we're going to make sure that we have in VS Code Bicep extension as well as Azure, which we're going to be using to deploy. So first things first, we're going to start working on the module, which is, since we are making the module itself, and since we are making the module itself, we are going to be making a lot of parameters and not hard coding everything, so we can reuse this resource in all different places. So I already know that we're going to do something like storage account name string, and we're going to call this guy storage account name. So what we've done here is we're saying, hey, we're going to create a storage account with the resource name storage account, and now this is now can be reused. This parameter or value can be reused in other portions of this bicep file in other places, and it just happens to be called storage account. And the first thing that you typically want to do if you're not familiar with a specific resource provider is that you're going to look it up on Microsoft, and you'll get the provider values all over here. And I typically use this every day to see what type of values that I can provide for a specific provider. So in this sense, we see that it's going to go ahead and need location. And let's just go ahead and use this here. And I like to use something as similar as possible to the value here as of what the provider needs for simplicity's sake. You could do something like storage account location and reuse this here, but I personally like to use location just for reusability. So now that we've provided these top level things that a lot of providers typically need, you're going to go ahead and provide the properties. And if you see here, press Control Space, here's all the different values that we can go ahead and provide to the properties for simplicity. Okay. Okay, so for the main thing, we can go ahead and do something like this. Skew. Object. And what I'm doing here is I'm making a default parameter. By using this equal sign, we won't have to provide it at the top level, because it's going to assume that, hey, you want to use this specific value for the parameter here. So we see here that the property skew typically you provide the skew at the top level or in the properties, but this one's kind of a non-standard way of doing this. So we are going to provide standard LRS, and we can use that for the skew. And again, this is a little bit of a different scenario, so we're going to do param and then kind, and this will be a string. And we're going to provide an access tier, and if we see this here, this BICEP extension will give you different scenarios of what value you can actually plug in here. So you can choose from cool, hot, and premium. Let's go ahead and put hot. And since we're doing a module here, let's go ahead and provide param, access tier, string, and let's make it another default value. So let's do hot. And now we can do control space and pick from one of these guys. And if you see here, this brick here is a parameter. And if you see these other values, that means that these are the properties that this these are the values that this property allows. And I chose the wrong one, so let's do access tier. And it's gonna go and do this. And now let's create another folder, and let's do something like management, and we're gonna create a new module called resource groups or resource group. Now for a resource group, because we're actually deploying a resource group, we have to tell it, hey, we want to deploy at the subscription level. And here's a few things that we can do. Resource group name, string, param location, and that's pretty much all we're going to need for the resource group. Let's do location, properties, and as you can see, this is probably the most straightforward thing you can do, is a resource group. And, one neat little thing is we can get properties or outputs from a deployment here so that we can reuse it in other locations. And then we can also do resource group ID. And here's all the different values you can choose from here. And let's go and do ID since that's what we're trying to do here. So now we have both the storage account, and let's get some more outputs over here so we can get more information out of different things here. Storage account, name, and we're going to define this as a string. And as you can see, I'm saying, hey, I want to call this value and get the name from that. That's what this period does right here. This period is saying, hey, I want to do something to storage account, and what I want to do is get the name from it. And here's all the pieces of information we can get if we wanted to go a step further. So for example, if we wanted the storage account location, we can do something like this, and then we're going to call storage account again and get location like this. So now we have two things. We have the storage account name and a resource group that we can create. Let's do something like data and pop this in here. So now we have two things, and now we can create it using these modules that we've created using our main.bicep. And this is just for me. So to make it simple, I'm going to copy all these values over here, and we're going to deploy this guy at the subscription level. And we don't need this. And we're going to say we're going to create a resource group using the module that we created. So basically what we're doing is saying, hey, which file and how do you want to create it? We're going to use a different file. That's what module is. The name of the resource is going to be called resource group. What file do we want to use? This. And now we just got to put equals, and this is the start of it. So now it's important to know that this name is going to be the name of the deployment that we're going to do. So we can just do something simple as resource group name. And now let's do params. So now this is changed from params to properties. So what parameters do you want to use for this module here? So we're going to do resource group is going to be resource group name. Location is going to be location. And that's all we need for this. So now we're going to do module storage account. And it's important that we do this here. We need a depends on. Let's not get ahead of ourselves first. Now name. So we want to do a depends on. The reason for that is we haven't deployed a resource group yet. So depends on resource group. And now we do name. storage account name, scope, resource group, let's just copy and paste this. Scope module is not valid. Okay, so the reason for this error is because it's getting confused with the function. So right now we're going to do something like deployment. Now it should get confused. Now you see this yellow. Now it knows, hey, what scope do you want to do it at? At the resource group level. So now it's going to look for a resource group name to deploy it into. Okay. So now let's do resource group deployment. And now we can get some work in here. Params. And then all we have to do is press Control Space and it can fill it out for us. Storage account name is going to be storage account name. Access tier. Actually, we can just leave it as is because we've set some default parameters. So if we look over here, we've put equal sign over here. So now we don't have to put that in there because it's going to assume we want these values in there already. Alright, so that pretty much should take care of everything. Let's see what we can do to deploy this. Actually, the last thing we got to do is create a parameter file. So my main bicep param. So we have to say using. What file do we want to use for the parameters? I'm going to skip a line here. Access tier. Since we've actually provided these here. So we can actually remove these because they weren't called in the script here. And just to make things simple, we're gonna put these at the top just so they're in the correct order. Save it. Param location. Now the difference between main bicep and main bicep param is that we don't need to provide the type. So over here, it already knows that it's a string, so we can just skip that portion of it. So we do West US3, and the way you can find this out, what values you can provide, is based off of whichever Azure login you're using, such as Azure Cloud or Azure Government, something like that. What we're going to use is West US3. Now let's call this something like AZ Cyber Lab storage account. And now we need the storage account name, AZ Cyber Lab, and then O1 as the integer. So with storage accounts, we do have to make it a little bit more specific because it has to be globally unique because it is using a URL. So let's do AZ Cyber Lab I don't think anybody's going to take that name, so now we can use that. The nice thing about the bicep extension is that all we got to do is do a deploy bicep file, and let's do something. Let's name this something like storage account, and then we can sign into Azure. I'm just using my own personal for now. So now we're using Azure Labs, and we can use West US 3, and we're going to use the bicep param file I created earlier. And then it'll give us a URL to take a look at what we're deploying. And we see that it deployed two different deployments. The first one was the resource group, and the second is going to be the storage account. And we see that the storage account failed because we cannot use that many characters. Alright, so let's do something like and we can do 0, 1. Let's try that again. And the nice thing is if we ever, since we created these outputs over here, let's do something like this. Looks like we can't do that. Let's just skip to our first strategy. And let's go and deploy this again. Deploy storage account. Since we named it the same thing, we just got to go to the same URL, and it should work like that. The reason I knew it was going there is because when we deployed it here, when we initially signed in, we chose the subscription that we were going to deploy to. If we take a look at this, we have Azure Labs, deployments, and it looks like we have something successful here. We named it Cyber Career Academy Lab 01, And it looks like this storage account was created with the properties that we chose on this end. And that'll do it. We see here that it went to the West US 3 region, and it's in that resource group. And the only other thing that we chose, at least on this end, is going to be what kind it was and the SKU, which is under replication. So locally redundant storage LRS. Everything else is defaulted and picked for you. Hope that was helpful, guys. Thank you so much.